morning, everybody, and welcome to our first professional development of the year. I wanted to take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Rebecca Donatelli, and I've just been hired as a new assistant principal here at the high school, and I'm very excited to be working with all of you and getting to know all of you and helping you grow as professionals. I just wanted to update you on some of the school's statistics for this year. So brand new Brunswick High School, you already know we are an urban school district. This year, enrollment has really skyrocketed up to 2,200 students. And to assist with that increased amount of students, we have 175 teachers this year. So that is a large increase, so we're growing. I wanted to start off our professional development session today with just a little bit of a do now. So you'll see at your table that you have markers and some large sticky paper. And I would like you to discuss the question below and with your group write down a response on the sticky paper. And when you're satisfied with your response, just post it up on the wall. And the question that I have for you to consider to get us started is, what does a classroom that is preparing students for 21st century jobs look like, and what does it sound like? So please take a minute to talk to your group mates about this question and post up your answer. Okay. So now that all of the groups have posted up their answer, what I'd like to do is do a gallery walk. So with your group, please walk around, take a look at all of the other groups' posters, and try to find any commonalities that the groups have. Okay, and I would just like to take a minute to share out, were there any commonalities that you caught as you were walking around and looking at the stickies? Okay, so I just want to start off today starting off with our objectives. So our objectives for today, and I was asked to do this presentation on the 10 principles of learning that we're going to be focusing in on as a school this year. And then towards the end, we'll have an opportunity for you to think about which of the 10 principles of learning you'd like to focus in on this year to really improve and get better at that. And you'll have an opportunity to really set some goals and think about how I, as a supervisor, can help you develop and get better at that. And here's our agenda, short and sweet. We're going to go over the 10 principles. Then we'll do some small group breakout where you can talk with some of your colleagues about how you can progress towards one of those goals. And then towards the end, you'll have an opportunity to really create your own personal goal and set that for yourself. Okay. The first principle that I wanted to talk to you about is making objectives transparent to students. So I had this quote here. And I'm not going to read it to you, so just take a minute to read it for yourself. But when students know their objective and what they're supposed to accomplish, they learn better because they can really judge where they are at in terms of that objective, and it also can help really to decrease some anxiety. So it's really important that as teachers, we don't just write objectives, but we make sure that they're apparent and understandable to our students. So it's important that they have student-friendly language. So how do we actually do that? Well, you all know we need to have it written up on the board in student-friendly language. I always like at the beginning of class to discuss the learning objective, revisit it as class progresses, so circle back to it, and then when you're ready to move students to that next level, consider having students actually create their own personal learning objectives, because that's really a great way to motivate them and engage them. Now, going hand in hand with objectives, we have providing feedback to students. So there's certain criteria that make feedback stronger and more helpful to students. It's important that feedback be timely. Can you give them that feedback right away? Can you give it to them the next class? I've been there as a teacher where 2 weeks later you hand them back the feedback and ways for them to improve, but our students, that's not effective for them. So it's really important that feedback is timely. Sometimes that means that you just have to grade maybe one small piece of their work or just focus in on one skill. But it is really important that we get feedback to our students promptly. The best types of feedback focus on what is right, and they focus on what are the next steps that student can do to meet the objective. And good feedback is also always very specific. Okay. The third principle I'd like to talk about is developing metacognitive skills. So metacognitive skills are an individual's ability to think about their thinking. So studies have been done that show that students that are high performers, they have very strong metacognitive skills. So they're really able to assess how they can proceed to meeting an objective. They can identify their own gaps in knowledge, and they can figure out how to correct their progress towards an objective, and they can also determine if they've met an objective or not. It's really important that we learn to explicitly teach these skills to our students. A lot of times we focus so much on content that we forget to teach our students these learning skills, and not everybody naturally has them. So it's good to take time to explicitly teach them. How do we teach them? At the younger grades, I've seen them use metaphors, such as their brain car. How are they driving their brain car? Are they putting it in reverse? How are they figuring out how to proceed to reach their goal? For older students, I really like the idea of us modeling our thinking. So for example, I was in a classroom the other day with a teacher that does a really nice job of teaching these metacognitive skills. He was solving an equation on the board, and he deliberately made a mistake. So this way he could kind of model to the students, how do we step back? How do we figure out if we made a mistake? How do we backtrack? And then how do we proceed forward? So it's so important that we explicitly teach these metacognitive skills to our students. So developing good questions can be a wonderful way to engage our students and lead to higher student performance. But it's important to remember that good questions take time. So typically the first time you write questions, they're not really going to be as strong as they could be. But it's okay. It's a process. Not everything, everything that we do is a process, and everything we do is iterative, because we're constantly reflecting as professionals and trying to get better at what we do. Just a few pointers to keep in mind. So good questions lead to divergent thinking, not convergent thinking. If there's a really obvious, mundane answer that everybody's going to get to, it's not as thought-provoking, and it's not as strong as a learning device, typically. Really good questions can be transferred to new situations and units. They're not so specific to a certain task. So when we're able to transfer them and we come back to them throughout the year, and it just makes it that much more powerful for the students and just a better learning device. Let's see. Our fifth principle I wanted to talk about was the principle of cooperative learning. So if we are going to prepare our students for 21st century jobs, we need to teach them to be able to work cooperatively. So the way we design our lessons can make it so that students are competitive with each other, where there's a limited amount of A's, or only a few people get to be successful and the other people cannot be successful. We can design our lessons and our classroom environments where students are very independent, where they're not helping each other, or ideally we're setting up our classrooms to be cooperative learning environments, because together we can achieve more, right? Now, planning cooperative learning lessons can be really challenging, and the key thing is that you have to make the task really meaningful, and it takes some really planning and some good, thoughtful planning to make these experiences meaningful. So there's 5 elements to a cooperative class learning environment. The first one is positive interdependence. So the students need to rely on each other in order to achieve a meaningful goal that they have in common. So the second part is promotive interaction. So we need to teach students how to teach each other. We need to teach students how to ask each other questions. We have to teach students how to support each other. These things are not easy, so it's important that we explicitly help students in doing that. I personally like to use signal charts where I put up sentence prompts that help students ask each other questions and meaningful questions, because this is difficult. It's challenging to teach somebody else a topic or skill. The third element of cooperative learning is individual responsibility. So students need to have a sense that if they don't do their part, it's going to be detrimental to the group. Another thing that we have to very explicitly teach as teachers is interpersonal and small group skills. And then the last part, in our constant rush, we sometimes forget to give the groups opportunities to process what they've done. Did they meet their objective? What could they have done differently? So differentiation. It can, there's always a lot of buzz around differentiation. At the heart of differentiation, it's when we set a high goal for everybody and we just use different scaffold and different methods and different strategies to get everybody to achieve that high goal. There's a lot of different ways to differentiate, and many of them are good. So for example, you can give students a choice in how they will present their learning. Will they make a slideshow? Will they make a video? Will they write an essay? So giving students choice is one way to differentiate. Some teachers are very good at using formative assessments and entrance slips to determine which type of skills different students need to work on. And then, sometimes you can have different activities or different centers set up in your room and send students to those based on their needs. Another way to differentiate is design assignments that are centered around an individual student's interests. Our students, they're people, they're not sticks. So they're all coming to school with different experiences, different skills, different interests. And when we can meet their needs as learners, well, we need to meet their needs as learners, and differentiation is one of the tools, or it's really a set of many tools that we can use to meet their learning needs. Okay. So argumentation. So if we are to train our students for these 21st century goals, argumentation is a really important skill for them to develop. So there's typically, sometimes you see this broken up into 3 parts, sometimes you see it broken up into 4 parts. The first part of it is developing a claim. The second part is you have to support that claim with reasoning. Perhaps in science class, it's some lab data. In math class, maybe it's a set of data from a problem set. In English class or social studies class, or really any class, it could be evidence from research that the students performed. But the important thing is they are using evidence to back up that claim. Another important piece of this is that students really should be able to consider and address qualifiers. So what would an exception to their claim be? And they should be able to address those, because that's a really important part of strong argumentation. Graphic organizers and prompts are really helpful in teaching students how to develop arguments. And if you look at the movement in education, if you look at Common Core and if you look at Next Generation Science Standards and the current learning initiatives, this skill is so important and really invaluable for our students to develop. Okay, authentic learning. So problem-based learning is a wonderful way to really engage and motivate our students. These problem-based learning typically center around a local problem. Maybe this is an issue that affects a student. Maybe it is an issue that affects the community. But in problem-based learning, students select the problem, they figure out how they're going to learn about the problem, they figure out what new skills they're going to need to develop. For example, I recently read about one problem-based learning unit where students figured out, well, they wanted to interview this individual who had undergone a certain medical treatment. So they had to learn how to run an interview. They had to learn how to set up an interview, and then they actually carried out the interview. So there's a lot of skills embedded in this. Typically, these projects culminate, they have some sort of culmination project, and they can go on throughout the year, over the course of the year. But it's just a wonderful opportunity to make learning meaningful for our students. Okay, closure. So a lot of times we spend so much time thinking of our hooks for our lesson that we don't give closure the attention that it deserves. Closure is so important for our students to be able to make meaning of what they've learned that day and also retain their knowledge. So always make sure that you leave time for closure at the end of a lesson, even if it means that you're going to teach a little bit less content in that lesson. It always helps to have just some go-to closures in your back pocket. So for example, I'm a science teacher, so I have the list from the Next Generation Science Standards of science and engineering practices, and all of the students have it. And so a common closure question I'll say is, take out your list of science and engineering practices. Which one did we use today? And explain. So it's just useful to have some of these in your back pocket that you can pull out at any time. And the last principle, which perhaps is the most important one, is establishing positive student-teacher relationships. I have this quote here that I really love. No significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. Our students need to know that we care about them and that we believe in them, and we believe that they can do well. Which I know is a little bit squishy, but there are some strategies that you can use to develop these positive relationships with your students. Simple things such as making sure that you call on everybody equitably, giving students enough time to respond to your questions, so that latency period. Explicitly telling students that you believe that they will do well. All just help them build up that positive self-esteem and that belief that they could do well. Other things would be, developing a class pride. Invite me in. Show me the wonderful things that your students are doing. Show them how proud you are of them. And it's just really developing those positive student-teacher relationships are so important. Ask them about how their weekend was. All that. It's invaluable to us. Okay. And I could go on and on about that, but I'll stop. And so at this time, we're just going to kind of break out into our small group discussions. If you look around the room, there are the principles posted all up around the room. So figure out which one you would like to discuss in your small groups session. Head on over there, meet up with a small group of people, and take a few minutes to discuss, kind of tease apart the learning principle and think about what it would look like in your classroom and some things that you could do to hone those skills. You're going to have about 15 minutes to do your small group discussion. So moving forward, I just wanted to put us all on the same page. So my goal is to help you get better as a supervisor. So we'll meet for pre-observation conferences for your announced observations. We'll discuss what your goals are in terms of the principles. And I want you to think about how I can help you reach those goals. What do you want me to look for in your classroom? So for example, do you want me to, collect data on whether or not you're calling on students equitably? Do you want me to time the amount of latency you're giving students? Do you want me to keep track of the level of questions on Bloom's taxonomy that you're asking? So really think about what kind of data I can collect to help you get better, and that's what we'll discuss in your pre-observation meeting. Then we'll have the observation meeting, and the post-conference, we'll see where you are in terms of meeting that objective. So I just have this exit slip for you, if you could just respond to these few questions. But I just wanted to, real quick, thank you for all you do for our students. It has been so wonderful working with you today, and I'm very much looking forward to working with you this year. And if on your way out, if you could just fill out these 3 questions, post it on a sticky and post it on the door, and have a good day.